I have never beaten Minecraft. That is to say, I myself have never taken all of the steps from start to end to defeat the Ender Dragon. I've been playing Minecraft since Christmas of 2012 when my brother and I got the game as a gift. Back then we mostly played in creative mode or on servers, and when we did play in survival we rarely got past a first trip to the Nether. Like many others, I also had a falling out with Minecraft in around 2015, and I didn't actually get back into playing it until 2020 when my brother ended up buying it for his Switch. I've been playing pretty consistently since then, mostly on realms with him and some of his friends. In those realms, I spend most of my time building and making farms. I don't really care much for beating the game. I was always invited to outings into the Nether to raid fortresses and to the end for the final battle, but the rare times I did join were less than successful. Recently though, I've switched from playing on Switch and Xbox to playing on PC, meaning I'm now playing on Java Edition. With that, I have the ability to properly document my adventures and the ability to introduce some of these quality of life plugins, so I figured why not kick off my Java Edition adventures by finally trying to beat the game by myself. My journey began here on the edge of this hill, taking a few moments to assess my surroundings before getting straight to gathering materials. After cutting down a tree, I dug a little safety hole to gather stone for more tools. And then once I had some more tools, I hurried over and killed a few sheep for wool. I also made sure to get some red dye for my bed, then I picked out an area near spawn to make myself a little hobbit hole. Well, I say hobbit hole, but it's really just a cave I dug into the side of the mountain. Still, it was enough to keep monsters away, and it was enough to survive my first night, so it's good enough for me. I'll pretty it up later. With a home base established, I immediately set off to find some iron. There were a ton of caves in the area, some of which I still haven't explored, so I went around to a few of them. It was mostly coal being so high up, but I did locate a couple areas with veins of iron. Also, you can see me right here getting jump scared by a spider sound. If that's not indicative of my combat skill in this game, I don't know what is. Anyways, I made it home with about 34 iron and some sugarcane. While the iron was cooking, I set up some birch trees right outside my base, and then I got some water from the nearby river. Finally, I suited up in iron armor and made a shield and an iron pickaxe. Now that I was suited up, my next goal was to get some more materials. I wanted a few wood types for my base and a stable food source while I'm farming materials for an enchanting setup. Spruce was first on the list since there was a taiga right beyond the forest I lived in. Beyond that taiga, I also noticed the Stripstone Cave and headed over to explore it. I was barely 10 steps into the cave when I noticed this, what turned out to be a spider spawner. What is in my opinion the worst type of spawner aside from silverfish, but I still made a note of the coordinates. With that, I headed home with a decent stash of loot. It was at this point I realized I barely had any food whatsoever, so I decided I needed some stuff to farm. That meant I needed to find a village. In the meantime, I spent like 5 minutes fishing and got not 1, but 2 enchanted bows before I decided it would just be quicker to do this. And it was. While I waited for the fish to cook, I set up my sugarcane, then I grabbed my food and I headed out. I opted to go in the opposite direction to the taiga this time, crossing through a cherry grove and noting all of the beehives for later. Thankfully, I barely had to travel at all to make it to a village, and I grabbed a potato and a carrot, as well as some books for my future enchanting setup. Also, while I was in the village, I spent a good few seconds marveling over the fact that I had never actually seen a Fletcher house before. There were even 2 of them here, but they didn't have anything exciting inside. There were still a few things I wanted before I headed home, so I continued my adventure out into the world. I tried to keep going in the same direction so it'd be easier to make my way back home, but in hindsight, spawn is at 0-0, so I guess I didn't really need to be that mindful. Anyways, I grabbed some pumpkins, I killed a few cows, and then I found the next thing I really wanted, dark oak. It's like spruce, but better. I contemplated heading home now, but I really wanted to find a jungle for bamboo, so I pressed on still. I actually ended up making a pair of leather boots at one point to get over this snow-covered mountain rather than attempting to scale down it. It was fun, never did that before, and I didn't know there was an achievement for it. A short while later, I made it to a savanna and grabbed some acacia wood. I didn't have any plans for it, but hey, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. I also found a shipwreck right here and a village right next to it. I looted the shipwreck first, getting a few good materials and a treasure map, then I headed to the village and I grabbed some melons. I almost forgot to grab the treasure, but I did double back, and I used the chunk coordinates trick to grab the treasure. For those that don't know, you can find the X on the map and then make both of these coordinates 9, and then if you dig down, you are right on top of the chest. At this point, my inventory was full and I still hadn't located a jungle. I was planning to head home at this point, but you know that one picture of the miner giving up right before he finds diamonds? Yeah, no, I wanted that bamboo, so I kept going. A little bit later, I ended up finding a desert. I know the biome isn't like rare or anything, but I always have the worst time finding them, so I grabbed some cactus while I was here. While I was going through the desert, I ended up finding another village, which didn't actually have much of interest. I mean, there was a camel, which I had never seen in-game before, so I had to show my wife how cute it was, but yeah, that was about it. So I left the village and found another one less than a minute later. Like before, there wasn't really much of interest, but I did find a blacksmith here with 2 diamonds. Between this village and the shipwreck, I now had enough to make a diamond pickaxe, and I hadn't even been proper mining yet. At this point, I decided that if the next biome after the desert wasn't a jungle, I'd head home and go in a different direction. My inventory was getting full, and that's a desert temple. Son of a gun. Well, that temple was enough for me. I wasn't going to be more greedy. I went ahead and dug down, being sure to avoid the trap, while also grabbing free TNT. Then I decided to dig down and make a furnace to smelt my iron. I did just enough to fill my inventory with the loot here in the temple, and then I finally decided to turn back and head home. There wasn't much of note on the way back that I hadn't already seen, but I swung a little wide when circling home. I found 2 ruined portals and 2 pillager outposts, but that was about it. Oh yeah, I also found that jungle that I passed like 1,000 blocks ago. With that, I was able to grab the bamboo I would need for scaffolding, and then I finally made it back home. This is actually where I called it for my first section, because I needed to go feed my dogs, and then I ended up getting distracted playing Stardew Valley with my wife, which was great, because we built a barn, and we died in the mines. Anyways, I got back on Minecraft the following day and loaded up a creative mode copy of the world, so I could fully realize what I wanted for my starter base. I already knew the basic design I wanted, but I used the creative world to really map out my interior. It makes the material grind easier in my personal opinion. I knew for the exterior it would be really simple, since I always end up making some kind of hobbit hole as my starter base. I always have, and I always will. This time though, I wanted to use a different design, and I chose this one from Gold Robin on YouTube. Link will be in the description. Once I had the design down, I spent about half an hour just farming wood and getting some cows set up. Most of the session was actually just me wasting time while breeding cows, as I had all the materials for the base within like 15 minutes. It was just a starter base after all. For some reason, I chose to head to the cherry grove nearby not once but twice. First to grind some dirt, here's me doing that, and then to fill my inventory with flowers to compost. I was literally just wasting like 20 minutes while I was breeding my cows. Anyways, once I had finally got everything situated, I went to work on the base. Firstly, I dug out a 16 by 18 cave that the base would be built in. Originally, I had planned to have this done in a time-lapse format, but as you'll see shortly, I really scuffed the replay. Anyways, after the hole was dug out, I built the exterior almost identical to the design, only mirrored with different materials. Then, on the inside, you'll see me throwing up walls and struggling with my mental math. In my defense, my wife was working right next to me, and I was only half focused on building at this point. I actually debated on tearing it all down and completely redoing it so I could get a good replay, but at this point I still thought I could salvage it with some quick cuts here and there. I decided right here to switch from doing the walls to doing some of the interior decorating. I threw up some barrels for storage and some support pillars with hidden lining inside. I also mirrored the exterior window design on the inside, just with spruce to match the pillars. Next, we've got the little kitchen set up with some furnaces and storage for food and fuel. You can also tell that this right here is where I realized I did my math wrong, and I put the walls in the wrong spot, so I quickly fixed that. On the other side of the entrance room, I put a few chests with more hidden lighting in the ceiling. Next up, I moved on to the enchanting setup, fixing the walls in here, and then finally digging out an area for my bed. The bed design here was kind of improvised, and honestly, it's probably gonna change, but I was just kind of struggling at this point because I kept having to grab materials for my chests outside, and I was just getting frazzled. I finished up this clip with some extra shelving around the enchanting setup, then I threw up a quick ceiling with spruce slabs. Finally, I rushed to tear out and replace the floor with stone brick slabs. Feeling a little frustrated with how I struggled at the project, I took a short break before getting to work on the exterior again. I cleaned up the miscellaneous farms I had growing, and then I tidied up the front of the base with a little bit of terraforming, if you could really call it that. It was actually just covering up the holes that I made in the ground from my walls. Then I fixed up the front entrance and I made a little path. Finally, right here you can see me desperately trying to get a beehive, but I never ended up getting one. With the exterior of the base completed, I had one more thing on my mind that I needed, an enchanting table. I already had the space designated for it, so I was ready to get it built. There was only one problem. I only had 3 diamonds. That was enough for a pickaxe, but I wouldn't have any left for the table, and I couldn't make the table first since I needed obsidian. It gave me only one option. I had to start mining. So I gathered some tools and I headed out. Since I had already explored a large portion of the caves here, and I knew they didn't go much deeper than the low 40s, I decided to make myself a little strip mine. I have a very particular way of making them, at least at the start, since I like my things to be pretty as well as functional. So for the first 20 or so blocks down, I made the stairway 3 blocks wide and 5 blocks tall. But after turning, I switched to a 1x4 staircase, just tall enough so that I wouldn't bump my head on the way down. My intention was to go down to around level -60 and start there, but I only made it to around here before I dug into a proper cave. I used some gravel to make myself a pillar that I could jump down to and assess the area, then I used the waterfall to get all the way down. Now, like I said earlier, I don't consider myself to be very good at combat in this game, at least not when my only gear is iron. But I was handling myself fairly well down here, which was a real confidence booster. That is until I got over this way to fight the skeleton. I saw a creeper on the opposite side and I wanted to go around to fight the skeleton, but I realized a little too late that using the shield doesn't make you crouch in Java like it does in Bedrock. I ended up taking 4 hearts of falling damage, and then the creeper wasted no time in following after to finish me off. This was my first death of what will no doubt be many in this series. I'm definitely not crazy enough to play hardcore, that's for sure. Anyways, I grabbed another sword and shield, then hurried back down to where I died. Thankfully, I did have the Graves data pack installed, so my stuff wouldn't despawn at least. Unfortunately, though, I didn't know you needed to have an empty hand to grab your things, so yeah, I died again. This time I didn't waste any time making new gear, as I figured I'd just run down there and grab it immediately. Thankfully, this attempt was actually successful, so I grabbed both gravestones and I blocked myself into a wall to resort my inventory. Determined to make this mining trip a success, I pressed on exploring the caves. Originally, I had intended to continue in the same direction since I could see the cave went deeper, but I saw a deep dark biome and immediately turned around. I did not feel like dealing with that. In the opposite direction, I found this large open area and jumped down, only to be greeted by 2 creepers and 3 skeletons. The fight was ultimately won, though I did blow up both of the creepers, and my reward for my efforts was my first diamond. It was only a single one, though. Normally I'd have turned back at this point, but I knew I needed 2 to make my enchanting table, so I pressed on still. As the tunnels thinned out, I kept hearing more and more zombie sounds. Zombies were the one and only mob that I wouldn't have any trouble with, so it didn't deter me from exploring this way. And it was actually good that it didn't too, because I ended up stumbling across a zombie spawner. I marked the coordinates in the chat, and I realized that it was actually almost directly beneath spawn, meaning it was also very close to my base. Still, with my sights set on finding another diamond, I pressed on. I continued delving deeper, grabbing iron and gold along the way. Also, I found this patch of gravel and tried to make the satisfying thing with torches, but it was kinda scuffed. Eventually, after none of the deeper caves yielded me any profit, I went back to the big open area to try and find another path. I pillared up to a darker pathway, and I found another diamond immediately. It was another single vein, but it was a diamond nonetheless, and that's exactly how many I needed. With the 2 diamonds in my hands, I immediately headed back towards the cave entrance, and I found another vein of 3 that I passed on the way in. But hey, I ended up with extras and a whole zombie spawner. I made my way out of the caves and back to my hobbit hole, immediately going to craft a diamond pickaxe. I did it slowly for dramatic effect because I remember there being an achievement for this, but apparently there's not. Anyways, pickaxe in hand, I headed off to the forest to a lava pool that I had found earlier while hunting for cows. I happily dumped out my bucket of water, and yeah, there's no way to make this entertaining, is there? What if I... And there we go. I actually realized on the way home that I grabbed an extra obsidian, but I'm sure I'll find a use for it eventually. I made my way home with the obsidian in tow and finally made the last interior piece for the house, the enchanting table. I placed it down in its designated spot and eagerly put my pickaxe inside, only to realize that I'm only level 11. I still needed another 19 levels before I could enchant my pickaxe, and probably a few extras if I was going to get the enchantments I wanted. Gosh, if only I had the super convenient way to grind levels that was like 100 blocks from my base, and yeah, you get where I'm going with this. I made my way back over to spawn, to the coordinates I marked in the chat, and I got to digging. Then my pickaxe broke, like 5 blocks above the spawner. So I went back home, I grabbed some extra picks and a few materials, and then I went back to the spawner. Honestly, I could very easily narrate myself building this whole thing and explaining the processes and all that, but it's self-explanatory, so here's a time-lapse instead. As I was finishing up the build and putting the water in place, I came to a realization. If I was going to complete this XP farm, I needed to force the zombies upwards. In order to do that, I would need a bubble vader. And to make a bubble vader, I needed soul sand. That meant I no longer had any choice in the matter. I had to go to the nether. I could feel a bubble of anxiety hit my chest as soon as the realization set in. Normally at this point, I would have asked my brother or Sunny to come with me, but this time I was all alone. I would have to face the dangers of Minecraft's Realm of Fire all by myself. I headed back up to my base, deciding that I needed to take a moment to get prepared. My tool's durability was low, and my armor was scratched and dented, so I had to make myself a new set. I put up an armor stand next to my bedroom to hold my old armor set. It was my first gear, after all. Then, with my armor and food ready, I grabbed my obsidian and headed outside to build the portal. I chose this spot here at spawn, overlooking my base and all that I had built so far. One by one, I placed each obsidian, then using a flint and steel, I lit the portal. I took a deep breath, and then I finally stepped through.